wars have two things in common. They open and close with words. Basically, if you are not out there setting the narrative or what is happening, then someone else is going to set it for you. And then it's too late, because then you're in the defensive. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And this is what Hamas understood they needed to do 20 years ago. Wordfare, like I like to call it, word warfare, is the most important part. It's the time frame that you can do something about it. The whole other side of this discussion and conversation is why people hate Jews. But from our side, I think there's a lot to be said about how we did not own, we weren't good stewards of our own narrative. You know, if someone accuses you of something and you start your conversation by saying, yeah, I didn't do that, it automatically sounds like you're lying, because you're defending yourself against what you didn't do.
Israel is losing the narrative war, and today's guest believes it's because we're fighting it in the wrong way. While most Jewish communities and advocates respond defensively to rising anti-Semitism and misinformation, Raquela Karamson argues for a radically different approach. Don't defend yourself in the narrative war, she says. Rewrite the terms of engagement. Just as soldiers train long before they hit the battlefield, Raquela believes that communications professionals need to train long before the crisis hits if they want any chance of winning the story that the world ultimately hears. Raquela brings nearly 2 decades of experience from some of the highest stakes arenas of public diplomacy. She served as an official government spokesperson after October 7th, a senior media advisor in the Department of Public Diplomacy, and has held roles across the Israeli Knesset, the U.S. Department of State, and the Israeli Prime Minister's office. She has worked at the intersection of media, policy, and crisis communications when the stakes were at their highest. Today, she is co-founder and vice president of Impact 21, where she helps leaders anticipate crisis, proactively shape narratives, and helps them enter the public arena prepared, not defensive.
So let's set this up, because you have some really serious credentials when it comes to the world of communications.
I'm an Israeli American. My parents made Aliyah when I was a child. So I grew up in Jerusalem, here in Jerusalem, where I live today. And I served the IDF during a very critical time, which was the disengagement in 2005. And after my IDF service, I started working in the Knesset as a parliamentary aide. That was kind of my first foray into the world of communications and PR. And from there, I went back to the United States for a little bit, and I studied communications at George Washington University. And while I was there honing my communication skills, I actually took some courses in specifically body language and psychological warfare. Body language is something that has always come really innate to me, because I don't know if you know, but like 70% of what we say is nonverbal. I then came back to Israel for a little bit, that went back to the States and worked in the State Department. There was different divisions in the State Department that got diplomats, US diplomats, prepared for their work abroad. And so I was in the Hebrew department, and we trained the US diplomats that were preparing for their tour in Tel Aviv in Hebrew and in area studies. So just talking about the region and kind of giving them that framework to understand what they were walking into. I also additionally worked briefly in the Congress, and then I moved back to Israel and kind of picked up where I left off. I started working in the Knesset again. There was a Knesset forum at the time called the Knesset Forum on International Relations. And what we did was bring together the international community, the diplomatic community, for hearings on topics that, it's sad to say, our topics we're still dealing with today, because this was maybe 16 years ago. So it's topics we're still dealing with today. Iran, radical education throughout the Arab world. And then after that, I worked for the Ministry of Public Diplomacy. I was a senior media advisor, and also for the Prime Minister's office, also as a media advisor and spokesperson after October 7th.
So take us back to October 7th. It's an emergency. What happened? What was it like to be a spokesperson?
It was a day that, you read, I'm a history buff. I think you can't really understand where you're going if you don't understand where you come from. And as a Jewish people, I think that's really important for us. So I read everything there was and watched so many documentaries. My mother's also a history buff about, the 6-Day War and just all of the 1948 war and the War of Independence and everything. So I read all these moments that were so impactful on my life. And October 7th, for me, was like living in a piece of history. It was very bizarre. At the time, I was actually working for the Ministry of Public Diplomacy, which at the time was relatively new. It was, I think, 7 or 8 months old at the time. And we were trying to, get the public diplomacy minister out in the media, kind of train her on how to speak to the West in the Western tone, in the way that they will understand and accept it. That's what we were working on at the time in this new ministry, and trying to make sure that we're sharing the Israeli narrative on our terms, not in a defensive way, but in a proactive way. October 6th, for some reason, I just couldn't go to sleep. And I was like watching random things, and I was like, okay, fine, I should probably get to bed now. And it was probably 4 a.m. before I finally went to bed. So I fell asleep in this like wee hours of the morning deep sleep. And as we all know, around 6:30, started hearing sirens. And for some reason, I thought I was dreaming it. And then it was another one and another one, another one. And finally I woke up and I was like, wait, it's not a dream. This is actually happening.
That must have been unusual, though, because my understanding is that Jerusalem doesn't often get direct hits because of the holy sites.
Less. I mean, there's kind of a pendulum. When I was young, I remember everyone, especially around my army time, no one ever wanted to come to Jerusalem. They'd be like, how do you live there? It's so dangerous. And then it swung, and Jerusalem was a safer place to be once there were no more bus bombings and things like that. And Tel Aviv was a dangerous place because of the rocket fire. So hearing the sirens like going off in Jerusalem, definitely again and again, repeatedly, you definitely knew something was wrong at that point. And then my daughter also ran in, and if she woke up, because she sleeps like a log, something is wrong. So it was Shabbat, as we all know. It was a holiday, and I don't usually use my phone on Shabbat. And I turned on my phone, and there was messages from my entire team. The Minister of Public Diplomacy was like reaching out to us, what's going on, what's happening. And no one at that point had a clear idea of what's happening. They were just like, obviously something serious is happening because the entire country is under sirens. So we literally just like flew on anything we had. I just like at the time, my cowboy boots were like near the door, and I just flew them on. And I grabbed like a jacket and a suit with me, and I took it in the car, and some shoes. My colleague picked me up. She drove all the way from Herzliya, which is a town outside of Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem to pick me up. And she said that along the way, there was no one on the roads. Like, it was just such a bizarre sight. There's like siren after siren. There's no one on the roads. It was like the apocalypse. So no one was on the roads. We get to the ministry. The minister arrives a few minutes later, and we're, trying to figure out what's happening. Within about an hour or two, we understand that this is serious. We're under attack. This is a major invasion. And the prime minister made the decision to call an emergency cabinet meeting. So we rushed to go to Tel Aviv, because in Tel Aviv, there is the military command center. So it's probably one of the safest places you can be inside that military command. And so we were going to the cabinet meeting that was happening there. And on the way, I'll never forget, it was truly like an apocalyptic scene. There were a few reserve soldiers going on the street here or there, but that was it. Like, everyone was stunned and in their homes.
So what was the communications mobilization like?
That's where there is a big problem. We in Israel wait till we are absolutely certain, till we know exactly what we want to put out. I think within 2 hours, though, we at the Ministry of Public Diplomacy, we did put out statements saying this is war, because it was pretty clear there was a breach of our border to the south at that point. So we did put out statements. We put out statements on all the official pages. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also put out statements. The Prime Minister's office put out statements. So there was something put out that, this is a war. This is serious. And also in Israel, you have this division called Pichud Oref, which tells the public when there's an alert and what to do. So they were definitely mobilized immediately, telling citizens to stay in their homes, to stay near the bomb shelters, to stay in the bomb shelters. So yes, there was a mobilization happening, but that was the scene on the road. And then the one other thing I will mention that will always stay with me, I don't want to get too into, for security reasons, obviously, what happened once we hit the compound and the cabinet meeting and all of that. But I will say that towards the end of the cabinet meeting, the heritage minister was there in the bomb shelter. And with the sirens blaring and with, the missiles falling, he decided to observe Havdalah under fire. And that moment will always stay with me. I think maybe one day I'll write about it in my memoir, because it's just unbelievable. that this is who we are as a nation. This is the Jewish people. This is what we do. This is how we've survived.
I want to get into your philosophy a little bit. You have a philosophy about how wars start and how wars end.
Yes, all wars have two things in common. They open and close the same way. If you think about it, they open and close with words. The first thing that happens in a war is not some sort of military weapon that's deployed. The rhetoric and the words, the warfare, or wordfare, if you will, is what starts every war. It starts years before, conditioning the public to be okay with this. And you saw that in Nazi Germany pre-World War II. You saw it pre-World War I. And you see it in basically any conflict. There is the rhetoric that starts coming out that starts being antagonistic in the beginning. Maybe it starts, being a little bit like what they call fighting words, nothing too much. And then it gets more intensive and more intensive. And once the public has heard it enough, it doesn't really bother them anymore until it gets to the point where it's propaganda. And then they buy into that until it gets to the point where the propaganda becomes the norm, becomes the reality. And then from there, the weapons get engaged, the military weapons. So my philosophy is that words are weapons, and the wordfare, or wordfare, like I like to call it, word warfare, is the most important part. It's the part that you can either curtail a war or do nothing, and then you have a more serious situation in your hand. It's the time frame that you can do something about it if you push back in that sphere.
So now we're seeing that, we had this war of October 7th. We're still kind of in the tail end of it. There was an official ceasefire, but the war of the words has not ended, especially with social media. We're seeing a lot of this rhetoric continue, especially the words that people are now pairing together, like Israel genocide and things that are not true, but are continuing. So where do you think we are on this continuum? Should Israel be prepared for another war based on the rhetoric, based on the words that we're seeing?
So to answer your question in short, yes. But I really want to take a step back for a moment and I'm only going to address this from the side of what we can do and us as a Jewish people and us as a Jewish nation. There is, of course, the whole other side on why people buy into this and why this happens to the Jews and all of that. If you will, I'd like to focus today on our side, where this comes from on our side, what we can do about it, how it's gotten to this point. So to do that, I want to talk about us as a Jewish people. So the Jewish people, obviously, we have an incredible story. We have an incredible institutional memory. We have incredible ability, I think, more than any other people, to document our history and our heritage. And not just to document it, but to preserve that from generation to generation. But what have we done with that story? Where have we told it other than to ourselves? Sure, we preserve it generation to generation, but it's only among ourselves. How have we owned that, and how has that played out on the world stage? For example, the Bible is the best-selling book till to date. It sold 5 billion copies. Now, if you look at the population of the world, it's a little over 8 billion. So I think it's pretty clear to say that our story is popular, because the Bible is, after all, a historical account of our journey as the Jewish people. Imagine, we're the people who belong to the most incredible story ever told, that the majority of world population buy into, and what do we do with it? Not much. You would think this would probably give us a leg up in the informational war, right? Because everyone's read our story, everyone's heard what we're capable of, everyone's heard our journey. It's quite the opposite. If you ask me, usually what we've done is try to distance ourselves from that. Assimilate to the point where we don't even remember who we are, and we don't even take ownership for who we are, which is Jews. You'll have people saying, as a Jew, but I agree with this. As a Jew, right, but I agree with that. You know what I mean? We've actually
to lend you credibility, but yeah, we have a marketing problem.
We do. It's the root of it, I think, is, of course, there's always going to be anti-Semitism. There's always going to be, from the other side, people are going to hate Jews. And like I said, that's a whole other side of this discussion and conversation, is why people hate Jews. But from our side, I think there's a lot to be said about how we did not own, we weren't good stewards of our own narrative. Why is this important? And why does this happen? Why would a Jew use "I'm a Jew" or "as a Jew" as literally a disqualifier for rather than being a steward of their own story, they're using it as a disqualifier. There's a couple of reasons for this. You might say this is a trauma response, right, from the Holocaust and even before that, pogroms and displacements and all of that. And I think there's some truth to that, and I think there's a lot of it's a valid reason. But I think this goes way deeper. This actually goes back, I believe, and this is my philosophy, to Joshua about to lead us into the Promised Land and cross the Jordan. And what you see there is something very significant. So you have this people that come out of Egypt, right? And all the incredible stuff that happens. But then here they are about to enter the Promised Land. And what happens? There's a sentence that my mother told us when we were children that has stayed with me my whole life, and it's kind of been a guide for me. And the sentence is from, I believe, the book of Numbers. And it talks about when the spies went in to stake out the land, and then they came back and they said, we were grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were grasshoppers in their eyes, the population of the land of Canaan at the time. And I think my mother has always told us that whenever we doubted ourselves or thought we couldn't do something, she would tell us, if you're a grasshopper in your own eye, you'll be a grasshopper in whoever's eyes. And I think that is the root of the problem here, because obviously there are many branches to this. And we'll probably get into some of those branches along the way. But the root is how you see yourself. And how you see yourself can either make you proactive or reactive. So if we go back to that story, which to me is as relevant that day when Joshua was trying to cross the Jordan as it is today, what you saw is that they came back and gave that report. Now, if you really pull back and look at this, you're like, how could they say that? We just experienced the Exodus and all of those incredible things. We beat a country that at the time was, the US of the world, Egypt. Egypt was the biggest country at the time. It won so many wars. It was the golden age country like you have the United States now. And we, as a small desert people, beat that country and gained our freedom and left. That was the most incredible story. Why should we then be afraid to enter the land of Canaan and fight something far less significant than what we just fought? But again, if we think we can't, then we can't. And how does that relate to today? Everyone keeps saying that when in the War of Independence in 1948 and all of that and all the incredible wins that we had, it's because we were David in the story. And everyone wants to root for the underdog. And nowadays, because we've achieved so much success and we've turned our country in 70 some years into something that rivals Europe, in terms of our economy and in terms of our development of the nation and in terms of the level of lifestyle that you have here, it's something that rivals Europe or the United States, even in some cases. So now that we've achieved this, everyone keeps saying, okay, now you're the Goliath of the Middle East. And because we don't take the time to define ourselves, again, to be good stewards of our own narrative, of our own story, what happens is we try now to defend ourselves. We're always like, no, we're not a Goliath. But we don't say what we are. So if you don't know who you are, whatever anyone tells you is fine, because you don't even know who you are. You don't know how to explain who you are. So what actually happened from 1948 to now is that we didn't turn into Goliath. We went from being David, a young, inexperienced, farmer's boy who had a slingshot with precision, kill the giant, to being David, the king of a vibrant nation that was trading with Lebanon and making deals with Egypt and building the beautiful temple and, solidifying a lineage of kings with Solomon and Rehoboam, everybody after that. That's who we turned into. So that's who we are today as the modern Jewish state. We're simply in the phase of King David versus the phase of David, the underdog with the slingshot. So I feel that if we defined our message for ourselves and get out ahead of it, it would really help the situation. Of course, I'm not going to, sit here and say that we're not outnumbered. We are. I'm not going to sit here and say that the billions and billions being spent by Qatar and others is not a uphill battle to fight, obviously. But again, David fought Goliath and he won. The Israelites should not have seen the sons of Anak, the giants in the land, as giants, because what did we do? We won. So if we really internalize our lineage and our history, we would know how the story ends. We're going to win.
It also makes me think of, so when people say like, you are a fill in the blank, colonizer, whatever horrible things they say. And if you don't know what is happening in Israel and you don't know the history of the country, then you might say, oh, that's kind of terrible. I don't want to be that, but you're not.
Right. Well, this gets to the let's go to the branches now. So that is how I see the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that we've not been good stewards of who we really are. And if we will take ownership, responsibility, and stewardship of our own narrative, things would get better for us. That's the root. So now one of the branches is there's a three-prong or a three-arm effect to the narrative. In the Middle East, there's a narrative that works, and that narrative is strength. You cannot be weak in the Middle East. You have to be strong. You have to be strong, and you have to be decisive, and you have to not back down. You can't show fear. You can't retreat at all. You have to be, for lack of a better word, dominant. And that doesn't mean in, like you said, a colonizing manner. That just means that we show that we're strong. This is our state. We've staked the stake in our homeland. We're back, and we're here to stay without wavering. However, this narrative does not necessarily translate well to the West when we're trying to say things like, look what's happening to us. 1,000 something of our people died on October 7th. It was definitely a defensive war. Our people are dying every day. This is horrible. This is sad. This is inhuman. All of those things is a completely different narrative than the narrative that has to play out in the Middle East. In the Middle East, we're not victims. We're strong. In the West, we need to explain what's happening because it's important that everyone knows the truth of what's happening here, that there is a victim and there is an attacker, there is an aggressor and there is a defender. That is just the truth of it. There's no way around it. So in the West, we have to speak one way. We have to explain one part of the narrative, and in the Middle East, another part of the narrative. And then, in my opinion, there's a third narrative at home that we have to convey, and that is to our own people. We have to convey that we are secure, we are strong, we're going to withstand this. We have unity. We are united. So I think it's just a little bit of a, tall order for the government to do all of those things and to clearly hone all of those three different narratives in the way that they should. I think that is an area that we're very much lacking. We don't yet understand how to bifurcate in a way that's going to be most effective in each arena. And so we either just say one thing across all the arenas, or we say nothing if we don't know what to say.
The other thing about this, though, is that as Jews, it's very difficult for us to play the victim. That's not something that we do because that's how we've survived. So it's not necessarily that you're playing the victim, but you have to convey when you're hurt, like when 1,200 people are massacred. For us, it's like, well, we've been through this. Let's pick ourselves up. But you have to stop and say, listen, this happened. They did this horrible thing. We have to really highlight that. And the thing that I saw also was because the narrative kind of turned to who are the people that we're going to help. When I saw global organizations going not to help the people that were in Israel that were displaced from their homes, not to help the people that had no homes, had no money, were attacked, had family members that were being held captive, but to help the people who perpetrated the attack. I mean, obviously you can do both. You can help the civilians in Gaza, but I didn't see a lot of outreach to the Israelis that either were displaced from the Gaza envelope or from the north when they were being attacked by Lebanon, or for the hostage families and the kidnap victims. Why is that?
As Jews, we live in this bubble where we are constantly news buffs and information hogs, and we're just trying to understand the situation, trying to get information. That's not to say that the rest of the world even knows how many people were displaced on October 7th. What I found when I spoke to people who weren't Israeli, or even to my siblings who live in the United States, and they would tell me what they were seeing on the news. They had no idea that 70,000 Israelis were displaced from the north for the better part of a year. They had no idea that not only did the people die and their towns were obliterated on October 7th, they didn't have anywhere to live. And they spent months and months and months in hotels in Eilat or hotels in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was filled with Jerusalem hotels were filled with people who had been evacuated from the south or the north. And my daughter and I went and like volunteered to try to help with babysitting, to try to like help them get settled in some way. There was a massive effort going on here at home. The entire country came together to help the people that were being displaced.
I noticed that story did not get out.
Exactly. And again, here's why. To touch on what you said before, because we have been told generationally for millennia not to be victims, to be survivors. In the woke culture that you see today, that's not a narrative that they understand. There's either a perpetrator and a victim. They don't really understand this middle ground of a survivor who goes through something but will not be kept down. So that is the difference. The Jewish people have always been survivors, not victims. Now, even a survivor, in the beginning of what's happening to you, you are a victim. And that's what I think we really have to understand. If someone attacks you, what happened on October 7th to the communities in the South, to everyone in the Nova Festival, they are victims. Now, do they stay victims or not? That is the dilemma here. And with the Palestinian narrative, they're lifelong victims. You know, they're refugees in the land that they come from. Like, doesn't even make any sense.
That's why it really garners a lot of world support. And the whole world really does stand behind the victims. I mean, why wouldn't you? But it's not an accurate depiction.
Exactly. They weaponize the victimhood. It goes beyond just what happened. Like, for example, in 1948, there were some people displaced, either because Arab nations told them to leave, let us fight the Jews, you'll come back, or because war displaces people. That's just a fact. War displaces people. Israel isn't the only place people have been displaced because of a war. So, okay, you were a victim of a war that displaced you.
That was also started by you.
Exactly. It was started by your leaders, and then you got displaced. So now, 70-something years later, you're still a victim of that war? It doesn't make any sense. You know, after World War II, there were a lot of Japanese people that had been displaced also within the US. There was a lot of things where they like put them to live in segregated areas because at first they didn't know who they could trust. And all of those people got resettled. And all of the displaced people after the war, there was a UN organization. The only other time that there was a UN organization specific for one type of refugee was for Japanese refugees after the war. You can look it up. It lasted 2 or 3 years. Why? It completed its job to resettle these displaced individuals. There has never been something like this, like what UNRWA is. There's never been something like this in the history of refugees, that they focus only on one type of refugees, the quote-unquote Palestinians, and they're perpetual refugees. And not only that, they do something which is actually illegal under international law. They pass generationally their refugee status. There's no such thing. A refugee, by definition, is someone who's been displaced. So if you were born in, I don't know, London.
America, there are people in America that call themselves Palestinian refugees with American citizenship.
And you see this everywhere. It's not just them. In the UK, all throughout the Middle East, if you're Palestinian, you don't have citizenship where you were born. You have no nationality. In fact, it wasn't always like this. People should know. Before 1964, which is way before the 1967 war, they did have citizenship. Palestinians had citizenship in Kuwait, in Jordan, in Lebanon. Yasser Arafat went to all of those countries and asked them to revoke the citizenship of millions of people to keep the Palestinian problem as a thorn in the side of the nation state of Israel.
Let's talk about the communication strategy. Before we get into your do's and don'ts, I want to talk about what happened during the war, during the October 7th massacre aftermath. What went right and what could have been done better?
I learned a lot, and I think as a nation we still have a long way to go and a lot to learn. The good news is there are actually a lot of people, contrary to what you might hear, there are a lot of people who are focused on this and who could make a difference if we did this cohesively. And I think the main problem is that we did not address this in a cohesive manner and we were not proactive. For instance, you have the example of bring them home now, that whole movement. Why are they saying bring them home? Where are they putting the impetus on getting the hostages back? On the Israeli government. But again, we were the ones who were attacked. Why do we have the responsibility to bring these captives home? We do have the responsibility to defend our nation, to safeguard our nation, to make sure none of our people are left behind. However, under international law, civilians are to be released without condition. You can look this up. It might sound shocking because there's been negotiation after negotiation with conditions and conditions and conditions. Under international law, civilians have to be released without condition. Also, the Red Cross, under international law, is supposed to be provided access to visit all captives, both civilians and military prisoners of war. In the 700 and some days that most of these captives stayed in captivity, they were not visited once, not a single time by the Red Cross. So you see here that basically this is catastrophic violations of international law. But why did this happen? Why did the whole Bring Them Home Now movement take hold? Because in the early days of the war, I mean like the first 2 or 3 days, we did not, again, be good stewards of the narrative of what was happening. In my opinion, the government should have come out with a campaign called Let My People Go, or Let Them Go, or something like that. And we should have constantly we did do it a little bit. You can watch there were a number of us that were spokespeople right after October 7th, including probably the most famous Elon Levy. We would say it. However, in the broader scheme of things, the old marketing trick that in order for people to buy into something, they have to hear it 7 different times. So repetition breeds consensus. And I think this is why I'm saying the strategy that they have to build, the government has to build, has to be cohesive across all departments, across all divisions, across all spokespeople. And I would say it should extend to the Jewish advocacy world, which plays a big role in helping to get our narrative out there. It's not just from the government. The way the Jewish people have always operated is wherever we are, we stand up for each other. Basically, if you are not out there setting the narrative of what happens or what is happening, then someone else is going to set it for you. And then it's too late because then you're in the defensive. It's interesting, I don't know if you know, but the word narrative is kind of a two-sided coin because the word narrative is defined as a series of relating events or experiences, so a story, but it can be true or fictitious, like either side. So basically, if you don't grab the side of truth and tell your story in the right way, it'll flip. The coin will flip and they'll tell a narrative that's false.
And that's what was found, right? The documents were found in Gaza, that they had this narrative in Gaza and extending globally to the United States, to Europe, all different places where everyone was on the same page. Millions of people were on the same page and the Israelis were scrambling.
That's absolutely true. And the reason for that is they were ready. Everyone keeps saying that Hamas keeps fighting and fighting and fighting because they believe they can win. I actually believe that Hamas knew a long time ago they would never win. There's actually this quote that I wanted to share with you by Sun Tzu. He wrote the book called The Art of War. And he says that the best thing you can do in war, here it is, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And this is what Hamas understood they needed to do 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They understood that militarily, they'll never win. And the rest of the Arab world as well. Militarily, they won't win because what has Israel done? There's another quote that says, if you want peace, prepare for war. That's what we've done. We've prepared and prepared for war in order to safeguard and give peace to our civilian population. So they can't win against us because we've focused on this area and we are the best in the region militarily. However, what they realized is that they would win the war without fighting, per se. Of course, they did fight and they did kill people on October 7th, but it's kind of like a chihuahua barking against, a big Doberman or Rottweiler. It's not really in the end going to end well for the chihuahua, unless the chihuahua has gotten the entire world to believe that he's the victim here. So it doesn't matter if he, bit off the legs or something of the Doberman dog or the German Shepherd. It's not going to end well for the German Shepherd if all of a sudden it looks like he's attacking him for no reason.
You've talked about preparing for war. Is this what needs to be done, preparing for the verbal warfare? And how do you do that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the one area where we are lacking because we have not put enough focus on it. First of all, I think that this war, the way it was prosecuted by the Prime Minister and the government, I can't imagine anyone else could have handled it or done it differently in a way that would keep the majority of the nation normal. My daughter went to school majority of the time that we were at war. We, went to war with Iran in 12 days, she was back at school. Did our economy suffer? Did tourism suffer? Did things like, sure. But at the same time, we're still standing, and we're standing in a really strong way. I don't think they could have done a lot differently on the battlefield that would have changed things. However, they were not prepared for the war that came before that, or that was waging actually before October 7th. They were not prepared at all. And it's because they don't believe.
And still now.
Exactly. And it's because there is a belief that once you win, everyone will eventually just fall in line. First of all, I don't think they believe it's an actual war. They're like, it's a war of words. It's a war of information. But as you saw, even through biblical times, if you came back and told the people, hey, we can't win, there's giants in the land, morale would go down, and you probably wouldn't win. So the war of words affects the bottom line on the ground again and again. So I think two things. There needs to be a real focus on it. There needs to be a command center where that's all they do. That's all they do. Word warfare is their game. That means every single time that something goes out, it needs to run through that command first. And then that command disseminates it to everywhere else. The narrative needs to be solid. We need to be proactive instead of reactive. Basically, if someone accuses you of something and you start your conversation by saying, yeah, I didn't do that, it automatically sounds like you're lying because you're defending yourself against what you didn't do. The same way that the military trains and trains and trains, and there are divisions and commands that focus on looking at what we did in previous wars, understanding how we can hone our skills for the upcoming wars, what weapons can we use, how can we do it differently, literally reviewing and planning, honing their skills, and that's why we win on the battlefield. It's the same thing with the narrative war. There needs to be a command that the people in that command do nothing but focus on the narrative, on the word warfare, and on fighting that in a real way, and then disseminating that across the board. The other reason the Palestinian narrative has taken hold so well is because whether it's a Hamas leader, a member of the Iranian parliament, a student screaming about free Palestine on the campuses, they all say the same thing. It's the same language, it's the same words, it's the same sentences. There have been times where they've just said verbatim the same stuff across the board. When it's that cohesive and that widespread, obviously people are going to be thinking they're telling the truth because everyone is saying the same thing. While as with Israelis, every different person says something else. I think that's, again, another problem that's uniquely Jewish in a lot of ways. We're always, two Jews, five opinions. We can't get it together. So I think that's also part of it. It has to be cohesive, and it has to be treated as an arm of actual warfare.
You've talked about this, that you study body language, that as part of that department, you can also study, just the way you would study wars, study presenters and study interviewers. Can you talk a little bit about, or give us an example of what benefit that would have?
So part of this division of warfare would be to fight in the public sphere, in the way that it demands. So you need to have your weapons sharpened for the battle that you're fighting. If you're speaking to someone in the West who understands certain terms like human rights, gives validity to the UN or to any of these human rights groups, if you're speaking to them, you would start with the way they want to hear it. The UN says this. You see the Palestinians do that all the time. They win at it. They're actually, you might even think that the entire UN is against us. And for the most part, is it anti-Semitic? Yes. However, there are actually a lot of cases and a lot of times in which the UN says there's not a famine in Gaza. The UN says, yes, people were sexually assaulted on October 7th. So if you're going into an interview, instead of saying, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, that's defensive, you said, UN Secretary General says this, that, and that. The special envoy to the situation post-October 7th said that, yes, people did suffer mass sexual assault. You use those authority figures, if you will, to your advantage. Then you sound palatable to the audience that you're speaking in. Basically, you have to know your audience, and you have to take the right weapons to that audience.
You've also talked about knowing your interviewer.
Yeah, specifically. So if you're speaking to, for example, a Piers Morgan, and he fancies himself a serious journalist, then you say to him something like, Piers, as a journalist, it is not journalistic practice to not do your due diligence before publishing something. When you do that kind of thing, it might seem like a simple move, and it is a simple move, but it then pulls them in And they have to kind of agree with you now. And it's harder for them to backtrack if I say, you're a journalist, right, Hadass? If I say to you, as a journalist, and from the beginning in journalist school, you learned to check your sources, do your due diligence. Have you not? You have to say yes. And now how are you going to walk that back to then say, oh yeah, it's okay to be a terrorist by night and slap a press vest on? Or I would say to you something like, Hadass, as a journalist, have you ever seen something where any person who hasn't been to journalist school, doesn't work as a journalist, can just slap a press vest on? I mean, what has happened to the press? Isn't that not degrading what's happening to the press? I mean, Pierce, you would agree with me that what's happened to the press and the mockery that the Palestinians are making of the press is appalling. What is he going to say? He's going to say, no, they're not making a mockery? So you have to know, first of all, who you're talking to and then how to talk to them.
That's so fascinating. All right, let's get into the do's and don'ts. Since October 7th, it sounds like there's a big army out there online of people that want to tell the story. Let's help them out.
Right. I do want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of the members of the Israeli advocacy community, because they're really doing the job that we haven't gotten to yet, the job that we're not covering yet. They're helping us win on that 8th front, which is a real front. So I want to say thank you to them. So I devised a few talking points that they're not going to fix everything, but if you think about it in this kind of do's and don'ts of telling the Israeli story on the world stage, it might be helpful. So one of the main don'ts is don't ever accept the false phrasing that they're giving you. So if you go, onto an interview or something and they tell you there's a genocide happening in Gaza, don't accept the word genocide. I'll give you an example in a moment.
What if they do it in like a whole string of words? They do genocide, da 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 da. By the time you want to talk, you want to wait, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. They do it on purpose, everything all together.
Of course. So that's my second don't. So let me get to the don'ts, and then I'll give you an example of how to integrate them. So don't ever use the false phrasing that's being presented to you. Doesn't matter what. Don't ever begin on the defensive or in a negative narrative tone. So for example, now I'll give you an example. The example is if they open with the genocide in Gaza and the famine and this and the that. Don't use those words. Don't say something like, we're not committing genocide, we're not starving Gazans. Because by definition, if you're saying you're not doing something, but you're using the same terminology, first of all, you're validating the terminology by saying we're not doing X. You're still saying X could exist there. Instead, an example that I would say is, actually, let me go to the do's and then you'll see how to do it. So do reiterate your truth and your narrative again and again. At every opportunity. Do be proactive in your answers and your arguments, leaning into either historical context as much as possible. I'll tell you what that means. And then do lean into, which we just talked about, prestige and perceived authority whenever possible. So now let me give you an example. You're on an interview and they say to you, by all accounts, there's a genocide happening because 60,000 people have died and whoever's not being genocide is dying of famine. What do you say to that? Instead of opening with saying we're not committing a genocide, we're not starving anyone in Gaza, obviously when people hear that, it's defensive. So you open with something like the pretendicide that you talk about. You throw in your own narrative words. The pretendicide that you speak of was planned way before October 7th. There were examples of this in the 2021 Gaza-Israel war where they were talking pretendicide. And it's exactly what that is. It's a pretendicide because it's not been validated by any true scholar or in any other war around the world. There's never been a case where it qualified in terms of deaths or damage done to be anything other than a pretendicide, which is what you're talking about. So is there a pretendicide going on in Gaza? 100%. So you threw in now a new word into the play. You refuse to say the word genocide, and now they have to deal with that. And then they'll probably come back to you again with it. And again, you say, like I said, your pretendicide, no one's buying it. And you never use the word genocide. You never give it the time of day from your own mouth, from your own narrative.
I also noticed that you're putting it in a positive. They're saying there is a genocide, and you're saying there is a pretendicide. You're never saying there's not. You put it in the positive.
Because if you go negative, it always sounds offensive. So you should try in any way that you can to be positive. I actually had an example of this. They were asking me about starvation in Gaza and the Israeli policy of starving people in Gaza. And I said to them, there is 100% a policy of starvation in Gaza. And it started in the first weeks of the war. on December 11th or something like that, a young Palestinian boy, I forgot his name, was killed trying to get aid. And so everyone's hooked into what I'm saying, right? So I'm like, he was killed while trying to get aid. And Hamas spokesperson, Abu Mazen, I think it is, came out with a statement, and he said, the food is for the fighters. If anything remains, it's for the people. And that was his statement in direct response to the little boy's death. So as you can see, there's always been a Palestinian policy of starvation. The food is for the fighters, out of their own mouths. So there I addressed it, I pulled people in, and then I brought facts, how they were saying that they were starving their own people, while I was never addressing whether we're starving anyone or not. Obviously, I know we're not, but again, you can never, like, if anyone's watching this and they're like, yeah, but you have to say how many food trucks are going in and how many. I was a spokesperson. We said that every day. No one cared. No one covered it. Our press briefings, anywhere from on the low side 30 to on the high side 80 journalists attended the live stream of the press briefings. No one ever asked us anything about how many trucks did it go in yesterday, how many trucks went in the next day. Nobody cared. Trying to defend yourself with numbers and statistics and stats doesn't help anyone. You need to go out in front of it. You need to run with the flow and not against the flow. And if they're saying there's a starvation, say there absolutely has always been a starvation. It's not even new to October 7th. Hamas has been starving people left, right, and center. If you don't join Hamas, you're probably going to starve. If you don't kill Jews, you're probably not going to get paid. So then you turn it around to what's happening on the ground, the pay for slay, the fact that people do starve if they don't fall in line with Hamas or send their sons to join Hamas.
Same thing with apartheid. There is apartheid. It's against the Jews.
When they ask about apartheid, you say, that's interesting. You're absolutely right. I've never seen a Jew in Gaza. There aren't even dead Jews in Gaza. In fact, the only Jews in Gaza right now are the hostages. So you're right. There's a lot of apartheid happening in Gaza. And you just you go with the flow and you stop defending yourself. That's the major thing that I saw across the board. Either government officials or advocates, they're always defending themselves. Yes, we have to defend ourselves in a war of defense, but we don't have to defend ourselves in a narrative war. Because like I said before, we're the people of the Bible. We're going to
win. Oh my God, you know what I just realized right now? What you're doing? You are doing word Krav Maga. Because you know what? I don't know if people know. Krav Maga is you use people's body weight in your favor. So if somebody wants to come at you like this, then you take the force in the same direction to your advantage. You're literally doing word Krav Maga by taking their words and pulling it in your direction. There's a genocide. You're right. There's a pretendicide. There's there's an apartheid. Yes, there are no Jews in Gaza. Yes, there's, you're doing word Krav Maga. That's amazing.
I know. I'm actually a brown belt in Krav Maga. So. So it's very fitting that it would transfer into my word warfare.
Wow. It's good to give people the tools, because when you say don't defend, it's really important to see how to do that, to see how you put those tactics into actual practice.
And this actually, speaking now to all the advocates and not as in the media, this actually is a defense. We are defending our people by speaking like this. It's just the way that you have to do it in especially the Western media. You know what I mean? If you speak on, for example, Indian TV, you can speak a lot stronger because they understand that they're fighting something very similar in their own country. If you speak, in German TV, you can sometimes speak a lot stronger because they're an ally and they understand it. But it depends. If you remember nothing from what I said, it's know your audience. Use the right tools for that audience. Don't come unprepared. Also, you just really have to know your stuff. I find it again and again and again where they just, either it's Israel advocacy or government members who go up to an interview and they just don't know these things. You know what I mean? They don't know that the UN actually said there's no famine. Throughout the October 7th 2-year war, there were at least 4 or 5 times where they said, no, it doesn't qualify as a genocide. It doesn't qualify as a famine. They said that. Of course, they said a bunch of other nonsense. But if you find only one place they said that, then you can grab that authority, notch and be like, yeah, the UN said so and so. And there's a guy. He's an advisor to Trump. His name is Gorka, I think. He went on an interview and they told him, the UN is saying, and this is saying, and that is saying, are you going to say they're all wrong? And he was like, come on, is this a joke? You mean the UN who's, has rape houses in Africa? You mean the UN, whose peacekeepers committed human rights everywhere? He threw it right back at them. He's like, what UN? He broke down the authority that the UN supposedly has. So that's the way you do it. You understand, first of all, who you are, what your narrative is, what you have to share. You understand your audience you're talking to, the framing you need to put it out in, and then you don't back down. You never use their words. Every time they tell you West Bank, you never say that. You say Judea and Samaria as much as you can. And also the other do I said was at any point that you can, use historical context. So they keep talking about ceasefire. A couple of times they asked me about ceasefire. I was like, what ceasefire? You mean ceasefire that broken on October 7th? They broke a long-standing ceasefire. They've broken 21 ceasefires. What ceasefire are you talking about? Which one are you referring to? So that way they have to now, you're asking for what? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome. Do you want us to have another ceasefire? Ceasefire number 22? Quantifiably, if 21 didn't hold, do you think 22 will? If you say things like that, what are they going to say? How are they going to respond? And I've seen a few people here and there do a little of this, and I've seen the Palestinians kind of be stomped because they have a set narrative they are told to go and just regurgitate. And when you're pulling them out from the set narrative that they know to regurgitate, they don't really know where to go with that. And they just keep screaming, children are dying, because they don't know what else to say at that point.
Do you think that Israel has a chance of getting back world sympathy so that people can actually see what happened? Not that Israel needs sympathy, but world support by utilizing these tactics?
I think if it was cohesive across the board, if it was not just looking at it as tactics, but really going back to what I said in the beginning, having a responsibility and stewardship for our narrative, owning who we are, and not backing down and saying things like, not capitulating in any way, not saying, there should be a two-state solution eventually. No, if you don't back down and you say, a two-state solution after what? Did you think that you could weaponize your entire people? That's what they did. They weaponized an entire population, attack another country, and then say, wait, let's go back to the start. Let's rewind. Let me try again. No, if you want to continue doing that, there'll never be a two-state. And just represent your narrative the way that you should in truth and responsibility and clarity, and don't back down. Then I do think there is a chance. And again, it has to be a focus coming from the top. They have to see it as a real war and a real front. I mean, we were facing 7 fronts. Did anyone even consider, hey, it's 7 fronts, it's too big, let's not fight? No one would ever say that. So when they come, I hear a lot of government ministers saying things like, oh, Qatar is spending billions on this and they have been for years. That's all true. But what do you not fight? That's not Jewish. It's definitely not Israeli to not fight. So can we make a difference? Yes. I do think that it would be a big help if it came from the top, the leadership of the only Jewish state. But can we as advocates in the Jewish world and diaspora make a difference by using some of these tactics and understanding this framing? Personally, I think yes.
Which is so beautiful. We're seeing just people are picking up their weapons and going at it because they're seeing a void, and so they're talking. And the talk is important. It really is.
Absolutely important. You saw, just one more thing I will say, recently with the whole recent deal, the 21-point peace plan, you saw President Trump, who is a master at this, love him or hate him. He's a master at understanding how to stake your claim in the public sphere to make that turn into the reality. So basically, he put out this plan. Everyone was waiting for Hamas, again, waiting for a terrorist organization to respond, whatever, waiting for Hamas to respond. They came back with this weird and ambiguous, silly response, which was not a clear yes. What did President Trump do? He went straight away to Truth Socials and he said, success, they've agreed, let's proceed to the next phase. Once he kind of set that stake and it was public and everyone was talking about it, it was very hard for them to walk it back and very hard for them to say, yeah, we really didn't mean da-da-da-da-da. So you have to understand the playing field that this is 2025. This is the battlefield that we're on. So you have to understand that, and you have to go out and do that through the lens of which we're living in.
Which is just amazing because your socials can be a tool. The president 100%. Uses it. People can build their socials as a tool, and communications is everything. It's so important.
We have to be good stewards of our communications.
Which means we have to learn our story. We have to. I do notice that the people that are the Azadu Jews and the people that are not really, that are allowing themselves to be tokenized are the ones that most don't know their story, don't know where they come from.
100%. It's called the October 8th Jew. It's the Jew who woke up on October 8th and realized it doesn't matter how much I assimilate, and it doesn't matter how much I act like you, talk like you, or look like you, they're still going to kill me if I'm a Jew. So I better connect with my heritage and know who I am and unify with my people. Unity has always been a superpower for us.
Those are the people that have discovered who they are. There's also the people that don't know where they come from, that are still allowing themselves to be tokenized. And I feel very sad about them. I do hope that they learn about themselves and come back to us. But I feel like that's the divide right now in the diaspora.
It's the key. And it's not, you're seeing this not only for Jews, obviously for Jews, which is very important for us, but you're seeing this in America with the way that the Palestinian narrative could take hold on US campuses in 2025. And that happened because the woke movement, for the most part, depleted everyone of understanding who they were and understanding that their own individuality is important. And when they didn't understand that, and they have no idea who they are, and they have no idea what they stand for, even something bizarre like the Palestinian cause is something to stand for. It's something to protest for, to buy into, to advocate for. And if you don't have your own values to stand up for, your own, things that you're advocating for, then obviously you'd buy into anything that comes along, as bizarre as it is.
And I did notice that they like to define what other people are. Like, they like to say things like Jews are white. Well, Jews are not white. Jews are from the Levant. They're not white. That is not our history in America. But again, it's the narrative game.
But ask an American Jew if they're white. They tell you they are, because they have no idea that they're not. They have no idea that if you test Jewish DNA, and yes, there is such a thing as Jewish DNA. We're not just a religion, and we're an ethnicity. We're an ethno-religion. You test Jewish DNA, whether you come from the Igbo tribe, which is a tribe in Nigeria, or you come from, Norway, you have more markers in common with people from the Levant than in your host country. So if you, again, it all plays back to, if you don't know who you are, then anyone will tell you who you are, and you'll have to take that.
Thank you so much. Where can people learn more about you, learn more about things that you have to say?
Well, I'm on probably every social media platform. Raquela in Jerusalem on most platforms. Instagram, not Twitter. It's a little too young for me to keep up with. Hey, you can just reach out to me in any of those and say hi. I'm happy to connect with anybody that's looking to connect.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a lovely conversation.